And now, everyone, please put your hands together and give a warm welcome to your host, Tom Lucas.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to those here on campus live with us, and for those of you online, thanks for joining us. Indeed, my name is Tom Lucas. I'm course director in creative writing for entertainment, BFA, and here at Full Sail, and I will be moderating / hosting this very esteemed and large panel this afternoon. And the session is Comics and Graphic Novels in the Digital Age. We have many panelists. I'm going to introduce each of them to you. Their full bios are on the app. And once I've gotten through all these fine gentlemen here, let's give them a big round of applause as well. Okay, we have Daniel Corey, owner of DangerKatt Creative Studio and a graduate of digital media. Troy DeVolld, producer, co-executive producer, supervising producer, and inductee of our Hall of Fame back in 2010. Barry Gregory, comic writer and co-owner of Ka-Blam. Roland Mann, course director and colleague of mine here in creative writing, BFA. And Sid Williams, also course director, colleague, creative writing for entertainment, BFA. So let's give them all a round of applause. And based on the conversations I had with these gentlemen prior to the session, I guarantee we have plenty to talk about and plenty of great minds to answer your questions today. So what I wanted to start with, really, looking at the title of the session, being in the digital age and all that, is where are we really at right now in comics? You know, so a little bit of how we got there with the changes in technology and where we will be going soon. Just sort of an overview, sort of a state of the union, if you will. And anyone can start. Or not. Right?
I'll start.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm Daniel Corey. Hi, you already said that. So I know a few years ago when I really started trying to work my way into comics, it was about 2007, 2008. Things were not digital quite yet, but like almost there. But, you know, we had self-publishing was starting to really become a thing, and we had these on-demand print houses like Ka-Blam, popping up, and suddenly things became possible. You know, writers, comic book writers, generally are expected to self-publish in the beginning. So if you're a writer and you want to get started involved, you want to start getting involved in comics, think about self-publishing. So that made that possible. And then a few years later, Comixology and a lot of these apps came up. So that's when we entered the digital age. And now Comixology is kind of the number one digital app for comics. And it's been bought by Amazon, so now it's Comixology Amazon. Anyways, things have, I don't know. It's interesting. For a while, when Comixology first hit and these apps started hitting, people were saying comic shops are going to close. This is the end of print as we know it. But with comics as well as with regular fiction and nonfiction novels and whatnot, the digital and the print seem to have learned to coexist, and the market has changed. Some stores, we saw Borders books close down. Some shops have closed down, but certainly print is still alive, and we still have so many fans that love print books. But it's just like whenever you have new technology, new media, things emerging, it's kind of a Wild West situation. You don't know what's going to happen. I think right now, as far as the balance between print and digital is kind of maybe leveling off to where it's going to be for a while now. I don't know if anybody has better numbers on that. But I guess that's just a little bit of what I had to say about just print versus digital. I don't know if anybody has anything specific about what specific publishers are doing, DC Rebirth or anything like that. But what do you guys think?
The only thing I know about DC and digital is that I know at one point, this goes back a couple of years ago, one of the things that you probably remember when DC was, they would release their digital a week after they released their print, and then they changed that and made a lot of retailers mad that they went to same-day digital. Well, the reason that they told me they did that is because they felt like they were losing 20,000 units per title every month to piracy because of that, and so they moved the digital back to same day as print in an effort to battle that. Now, I don't know that they've got any accurate numbers as to how they battled that or not, but part of the problem with the digital is monetizing, is that there's no real everyone that I talk to, no one really wants to talk numbers. Everyone that I talk to is like, yeah, the digital's there, but it's not really doing that well. Even with Comixology and with Indie Planet, these things are so readily available, but most of the people I talk to are like, yeah, I don't get that many sales through digital. All the sales are still coming through print, and the only way we have to track the print is through Diamond Comics distribution. And if you're a follower of comics, that John Jackson Miller does a comic. I never can get this right. I think it's comiccron.com, in which he examines, basically he just kind of posts the numbers every single month so that you can look at them. And of course, DC's Rebirth has higher numbers than the industry's had in 15 years. But this is the print, and so there's no way to really know what they're doing digitally. So, and the other thing is that those numbers are only the books that go through Diamond. So you would not know the numbers for books that don't get carried through Diamond distribution, that you go down to MegaCon and pick up your favorite book from your favorite indie artist or writer down there. If they're not in Diamond, there's no way of really knowing, unless they report it, there's no way of really knowing how many copies they sell.
There's also you got trade publications that are distributed through Baker Taylor and whatnot, and then there's libraries,
right.
So there's a lot of different tracks you can follow with print. But as far as the monthlies with the floppies and whatnot, Diamond is the vein and the source for it. That's where all the shop owners used to order from, and
I will say, just from almost a consumer standpoint, and personally, I think it is an exciting time as far as availability or accessibility with so many things out there digitally. I can remember the days when you would buy a comic as a kid and there'd be an ad in the back for another comic, and you go, gee, I wish I had that, or I wish I'd bought that when I was at the newsstand or the grocery store with the magazine rack, and that comic was gone and it wasn't as easy. You had to save your pennies and order a hard copy. Now almost everything is out there legally, digitally. Let me emphasize legally. But I do find it, great if somebody tells me there's, an interesting title, I can at least go get to the digital reading of it. And I do tend to think of maybe digital as reading copies versus the things you love, you want to own a hard copy of.
So you buy the hard copy and slab it?
I think, yeah. But, and I'm excited by things like Hoopla that you can get through libraries and then read things that you might not want to buy, but you can check them out and read them. And I've been able to catch up on a lot of titles that way. So just as far as everything being at your fingertips. And some people may not remember times when everything wasn't at your fingertips, but there was like this vast wasteland at one time where there were all these things back there that you heard about but you couldn't watch before YouTube and before digital comics. And now everything's out there, with the exception of some DC stuff, I guess, it's not digitized yet.
I know, like for me, if I have a meeting with a publisher, 2 days from now, I'm like, I'll go read, all 30 issues of this run before that meeting, and just go out on Comixology, and bam, it's pretty convenient.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I tend to define digitally a little differently than most people do, and I've got a vested interest to do that. But for me, there's digital for the screen and there's digital for print as well. I mean, because it's the same files that you're viewing on the screen, if the resolution is high enough, that I'm going to print digitally in a print-on-demand environment. So if somebody, and what that has the effect of doing is, for creators and publishers, is really dropping the barrier to entry. Because when Roland and I were coming up in the 90s, into comics, if you wanted to self-publish, if you wanted to dip your foot in the pool there, then you had to print thousands and thousands of copies and park in your driveway because your garage was full of boxes of unsold books. And and not everybody was willing to spend, a few $1,000s to get that done, to be able to prove that I'm a comics creator. This is my work. Now what you've got to do to be able to say that I am a published creator is publish one book in print or online, and you're in. You've got something to show someone. If your goal is to work for a major publisher, they don't want to see, or they're less inclined to look at a script. If you show
photocopies.
Or photocopies. If you show them a printed book, professionally printed book, or a professionally prepared digital book you can show them on a screen, then your chances of getting in go up significantly. And you can do that now far easier than you could, 20 years ago when we were coming along.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the quality is, so much better
It is.
than what could have been printed back then.
Excellent. I'm going to transition us over and give Troy something to talk about. So I'll pose this question to you, and then we can branch off of that.
All right.
So any story can be told in graphic form, but what makes a story right for comics over a different medium?
Well, here's the thing. I'm going to open that by saying that my taste is different than most people I know who read comics. Most of the people who are really invested are into heroes and larger adventures and things that capture sort of the fancy of the imagination. I come from a background where the last book I did was in '96, and the books that I was working on were things like Jinx Oople's Psychic Performance Artist, and these very sort of esoteric, goofy things, which in the 80s and 90s you had Cerebus, which was an aardvark who has aspired to become the Pope at some point during the series. These are really oddball books, and that's more of what I enjoyed. But if you have to go that broad, it's I won't even say things that capture the imagination, because I'm just talking about things I love. Please excuse me, I'm just going to fall in that hole. Books like David Chelsea in Love that were just about a guy and how hard it was for him to keep a relationship. Books like Strangers in Paradise. These are all books from when I was much younger that are completely foreign titles probably to most people in the room. But what captured that about me was there's a fantasy element, but there's still sort of a personal connection, which I suppose in the superhero comics you're still identifying with sort of that personal, the alter ego. The Peter Parker thing is Peter's me, Peter's us, Peter's every nerd. There's some way that we're involved in that fantasy, and that it's not just existing on its own plane somewhere else. There's always a human and personal connection with any story. Any story is like that. Is where do I find myself in my story? What's the point of entry to it? What makes it interesting to me as an individual is just that those characters have something identifiable. I can't just watch two Bizarro Titans beat the crap out of each other. There's some human element to every great story.
Excellent.
That's as close as I can approximate an answer.
Okay, it's approximately an answer. I like it.
Sweet.
Other panelists.
It's just, you think of any art form other than a novel. Like a novel is just the author's voice and words, and so that's what a novel is. You think of anything else other than that, a comic, a movie, a TV show, like a movie is a combination of moving images, actors' performances, camera and lighting, editing, music, everything kind of comes together into this big bath of audio-visual experience. So a comic is kind of, along that lines. You got visual, you got words, you got a perception of motion from panel to panel. And if you want to express it, if you want to express a story that has a sense of motion to it, has a sense of color and of life to it, and that has a collaboration with an artist, a visual aspect to it, then comics is the right way to go. It's just a lot of people will express to me shock that perhaps comics is a low art form and it's not good enough for them, and I'll just say, well, do you watch television? It's visual. It has words. If you are binging Travelers on Netflix and telling me that comics aren't good enough for you, I'm not going to say. But but yeah, it's just like, how do you want to express the story? And comics gives you a unique combination of elements. And you don't have to pay a crew, a camera crew and a lighting crew, but you'd have to take care of your artist. But yeah, it can be done on a certain budget, and it's visual as well as words. So.
And I think that's a very good point. There is no special effects budget. And so a story that's right for comics often breaks through the limits that you might have even in film, because you can let your imagination go wild. And if there's a zany sidekick or whatever that floats over the hero's shoulder, and that's right for the story, then you can do that. You don't need CGI or anything to make it happen.
Yeah, you got to be careful though with crowd scenes and stuff. You can drive your artist crazy with the we got unlimited budget, and the artist is like, no,
The
I can't
Armada
draw
approaches.
1,000 people in one panel.
Well,
Shut
and
up.
they get bored and they start drawing their friends in and things like that too.
Yeah.
So one thing I would add too is that you have to think about audience, right? Anytime you think about any kind of entertainment like this, is that, I mean, obviously we do live in a day and age when you can do anything in a comic, but part of it is you have to think about audience. If you're not just doing it for yourself, just to say, look, I did a funny book, right? Then you got to say, okay, who is my audience and where am I going to find them, and how am I going to get to them, that kind of thing. So one of the things I always tell my class is be very, very careful of talking heads. Because to me, page after page after page of talking heads can be very boring. Now, I don't mind a page to get me from one scene to the next, or as part of what's in a scene. But if I flip through a book and I just see 10 or 12 pages of talking heads, I'm like, yeah, I'm not interested in that. It's just
These comics should have a sense of motion,
right?
Even if there is a lot of conversation, then have things happening, just like in a movie script. If you need a lot of exposition in the dialogue, God forbid, have them going from one room to the next, or have them swatting flies. I don't know what. But same.
I think if you have too many talking heads, the story probably and the concept needs a bit of amendment.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Tom and I were talking about Lock and Key the other day, the Joe Hill scripted comic, which is about a family that moves into an old dark house. But the typical movie, the typical book about a family moving into an old dark house would have them encountering ghosts or spirits or whatever. Lock and Key gives them keys that unlock supernatural abilities within the characters. And so it is an idea that is just right for comics, I think, as just one example.
Yeah.
On the talking head thing, if you want a concrete example of that, take a look at, not all of them are guilty of it, but most of them are, the comic adaptations of popular novels. Mm-hmm. Take a look at those. They'll just be one talking head scene after another, because they're trying to be true to the novel.
Right.
But they're two different mediums and they read very differently. So you pick up the comic adaptation and you flip through it and you go, well, why aren't I just reading the novel?
Right.
Well, and if you find the old Classics Illustrated, which are now available digitally, the captions are like blocks and blocks and blocks of text.
And they're often pulled from
right out of the book.
I know a lot of times those novel adaptations are put together by the publishers of the novel who are not necessarily accustomed to doing comics. I work with Dave Lanfear, who's one of the biggest artists, one of the biggest letterers and logo designers in the business, and he's done a lot of work with some of those big publishing houses, and he's like, they're not used to making comics. They ask for this kind of revision right before we go to print, and they don't understand it's going to take a week to do it and whatnot. So some of that is coming from had the publisher not having experience with comics.
Sure.
And this is both a good thing and a bad thing, because comics are so easy to get done. Is that anyone, even those people who have zero experience, can just say, "Oh, look, I'm going to do a comic. Boom, here it is." Mm-hmm. Right? So if you get outside of Marvel and DC, you're talking about the spandex stuff. You get outside of Marvel and DC, and you find a wide range of stuff. And it's like any other kind of entertainment medium. You really have to sift through it to find the stuff that's good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that does become harder and harder with the proliferation of stuff that's out there now.
It is a sea. It is a sea of content out there that you're competing with. So to sort of play off our last question about deciding whether or not a story is right for comics, self-publishing, which was mentioned earlier by Daniel, is really kind of the gateway to sort of auditioning for the greater industry and showing what you're capable of and the kind of stories that you can tell. The thing that's missing from self-publishing is the pitch and seeing whether or not something is a truly marketable idea, if it's something that will find readers, if it's something that has a place in the market. And yes, we can tell all kinds of stories because how many niches there are now and how many channels. But for someone here or watching online, they think they have a great idea for a comic. But even though it may be easy with the tools, it's still a lot of time that might be spent on a better idea or a better direction, right? Which you can't get. That's the only thing, you can't get the time back. So what kind of suggestions, advice, or evaluation process should an aspiring creator have when they're first starting out?
You got to be real careful not to listen to mom. Excuse me. Mom loves you, and everything you do is great. So you have to be real careful not to listen to mom or dad or family members. Obviously, we're in. I'm sorry. I'll take the question first, I guess.
Roland?
Obviously, we're at a university here. One of the things that I frequently tell my class is that look at the people around you. They're trying to accomplish the same things that you're trying to accomplish. Make those people your cohort. Make them the people that you share your stories with. But give them your story and expect feedback. But then again, offer the same thing to them. When they hand you a story, give them honest feedback. And part of the hardest thing in things like this is getting egos and emotions and stuff like that out of it. When you can get with a group that you can trust, you can say, and I tell my class this, you can say your story stinks, but I still love you, right? Because what you're trying to do is help them to get their story to where they want it to be so they can do what they want to do to it. So my thing is reach out to your classmates, right?
The term beta reader has come into usage among novelists, and I think that's a good thing good label, I guess. And find good beta readers.
Don't confuse your critics with your enemies. Your critics are often going to be the most valuable asset that you've got when you're coming up.
Barry, you had a group in college that you worked together to really trash each other's work in order to make it better. What was that?
Yeah, I had a playwriting class that I took in college that had a wonderful old gentleman was teaching it, but 5 or 6 of us in the class figured out after the first couple of weeks that if we were going to learn anything that semester, we were going to have to teach ourselves. And so we got together, regularly a couple of times a week after class. We'd go to a restaurant or something after class and just savage each other's work. And it was painful, but we learned an awful lot that semester.
What'd you call it? The masochist society?
Yeah, it's like a masochist club. But yeah, sometimes you're gonna get criticism you can't use. Sometimes, but be sure you can't use it before you discard it.
Yeah.
Roll it around in your head, look at it really closely, see if there's any validity to it. More often than not, you'll find there is some validity to it.
Even if it's not exactly what they say, there's something about what they said that can affect.
Yeah, there was a trigger there somewhere.
Yeah, there was something there that caused them to say this one thing, and you look at this one thing, it's like, that's not it, but yes, I see how they got there, and I need to fix this thing.
Mm-hmm. And this may be on the most elementary level imaginable, but I've seen a lot of books that don't look like it. When you're pre-scripting things, back in my day, back during the glut of black and white comics in the 80s and early 90s, the only thing that those books really had going for them were extremely well-crafted, interesting, quirky stories. There are a lot of people I know in comics then that I still know now who will sit down and just start drawing, and when I talk about indie comics, it's the one-man band, the guy that's doing his own lettering, the guy that's doing everything by himself, and they'll just start drawing and they'll get stuck when they're sketching something out because they didn't write a story before they started. The thing you've got to remember about comics always is that no matter how spectacular they are, if the story is crap, the story is crap.
Yeah.
And that's incredibly important to remember when you're putting anything together, is if you're going to engage anybody, you can't engage anybody with art that's divorced from a decent story.
Might be a beautiful looking piece of crap.
It might be a beautiful looking piece of crap. I work in reality TV. I know something about a beautiful looking piece of crap.
We live in reality TV right now.
There you go. But yeah, it all starts at the story level, and the quality of the art is important, but I think it's secondary to a great story.
Yeah, I know when I was developing Moriarty with my artist, his name is Anthony Diachidue. I was part of this networking group in LA called Comic Book Sunday, and it was a group that met monthly, and people would just stand around, drink beer, talk about movies and comics, and people would bring their comics and put them on the table and swap, and it was just a good networking event. And we were just working. Anthony and I were just working on our own at the time, and we would slowly produce these pages. It was probably just about a year and a half before anybody got iPads. So I was actually printing them out on my color printer at home and putting them in a notebook. And whenever I had new pages each month, I'd bring them and I'd just show the pages around to the comic pros that I know and get feedback. And and we'd make tweaks to the art and stuff based on good feedback. And I like what you said. Your critics are not your enemies. I've gotten a lot of hard criticism from some really good people that I've taken. Every once in a while you get advice you can't take. I mean, there are some jerks out there, but you'll know those people. You'll know those people that are just working out their frustrations on you. That'll be abusive, and they'll say whatever. I can get negative criticism from two different people and know which one to take to heart. So you'll figure that out.
Awesome answers, guys. And to sort of build upon it, and I'd really like to try to discuss specific resources if possible. If I'm a student and I'm in a small town or somewhere where I don't have access to those beta readers or a writing group or a comic book Sunday group, I'm going to turn to online resources to find that. So I'd like to discuss, at least briefly, about some of the better communities out there for this sort of thing, which I think also would sort of naturally progress to finding people to collaborate with. I'm a writer, but I can't draw. I'm an artist, but I can't write. And then lettering, color, and so on and so forth. So where can our students go specifically to find these people, and what might they find there, and how do they leverage it for success?
Well, the first place I always send my students to is a site called penciljack.com. And it's a site for, we were talking online stuff. It's a site for pencilers. It's a workshop. It's because I teach a comic workshop, and what we do is we do the critiques. We have the stories, and then the students critique each other and kind of tear them apart. Pencil Jack is the same thing for comic artists. They submit their work, and other artists come along and comment on them. Often they'll take their art and they'll scan it and they'll draw in red ink or something. Here's what's something you maybe change your perspective here or there. And there's the people at Pencil Jack are artists who want to work in comics. And so this is one of the reasons I say, go there, because these people want to do the same things you want to do. You're a writer, they're an artist. They want to do the art aspect, so go there, build a friendship. And first thing you got to do is you got to build a friendship with them. I think it's very tough for us as writers. We want to reach out and say, oh, you're a fantastic artist. Here, draw my story. I know that if it were me, I would kind of go, I don't know about that. What are you going to do? How much are you going to pay me? That kind of thing. And so I think you kind of, you have to build a relationship with them first. But I'll just give the one and then see what. But yeah, Pencil Jack is the number one spot I send folks.
That was the one I knew.
Exactly.
Barry?
I'm a little leery of going into blind situations like that. I'd much rather develop a group of people that I know and that I know are on about my level. I've been in 3 or 4 different groups like that, and it can either be a fantastic experience or it can be a terrible experience. And the difference is, for me at least, in my experience, if you're in a group of people that are all at about your level and are all trying to get better and are all contributing, it's a great experience. But if you're in a group where you're producing and you're trying to get better, and you've got people in the group who aren't, but are perfectly fine with throwing in on the conversations and stuff, it can be real frustrating, because you're not sure what their motives are. If they're not really trying to get better, if they're not participating, then why are they here, and is there any real validity to what they have to offer? So, yeah, I'm sure there's terrific support groups online. I'm not really familiar with any good places to go to get those.
Speaking of that personal experience, though, I mean, and one thing, regardless of where you are, you're probably close to a town that's going to have a convention these
Absolutely.
days.
Yeah.
And so, find the closest city and, look online for the convention listings and then go. And hang out in the dealer's room, look for the guys sitting around with their pads.
Yeah, like cruise the artist alley,
Right, yeah.
and stop and talk to people. Stop and talk to them. Buy one of their postcards. Get their business card. Go home and check out their stuff online. I find people that way. I've been getting a lot of pin-up art done for my couple of new titles that I'm doing right now, and some of the folks are just folks that I found recently at shows. Yeah. And also when you're shopping new material, conventions, we'll probably get into that in a minute, but conventions are very important when you're trying to get something published.
Well, and as you're new and you're coming up, I mean, I had a very strange experience in my teens. I started a regular correspondence with a guy named Will Eisner. That if you're into comics, having a correspondence with Will Eisner is like having, God sitting on your shoulder telling you what to do. And he would send me little notes. He's like, hey, why don't you send me a page with a bunch of drawings of telephones and make sure that no two of them look alike. My characters used to float in outer space, and that was just kind of his suggestion that I should put them in an environment instead of these geometric backgrounds, because I really wasn't that great an illustrator. When you write letters to comic book artists, a lot of those people are wonderful because they know what it's like to have been in that space. And there are guys like Josh Quagmire used to draw a book called Cutie Bunny. And when I would get a response from Josh Quagmire, it would be an envelope that was so stuffed with Xeroxes of him illustrating a point to me that he would have scotch taped the envelope shut because he couldn't seal it. Don't be afraid to ask the professionals by mail with a self-addressed stamped envelope. Hey, they're used to the what kind of pens do you use? And then it turns into this massive response. Peter Laird from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles sent me a typed page that was on oversized paper that was just, these are my pens, this is what I use, we like to use Zipatone, we do this, we do that. These people are willing to help you and talk to you in some cases. I don't know what the volume of mail major people do, but the indie guys love to get mail. That just tells them somebody's buying the books.
And for an industry that really has an outsized influence on popular culture right now, it's a pretty small, insular group, and it's not hard to build relationships with people that you would think would not talk to you. Every day online, I'm talking to people that I read as a kid and were just blown away that they think of me as a friend now. So it's not hard to reach out and find somebody that will help you and will mentor you a little bit if you show that that you're not just a fan, you're really willing to to put in the work.
And people are so much more accessible now than they were. I belong to a couple different comic book fan groups on Facebook, Mike Mignola Appreciation Station and George Perez group. And Mike comes in all the time and chats with you. And so, that's just great, And I've also seen a lot of people meet because they're like-minded and then they make plans to work on projects and things like that. But I think one of our biggest takeaways here is that it really still is about the face-to-face networking. And I saw some interest in talking about the conventions. So let's just go ahead and talk about the conventions. Which ones are good to attend, what we do when we're there, what to expect, how to be prepared, so on and so forth. And anyone can really start with this question.
I don't know which one's the best, but there's big ones, there's small ones. Big ones are good because you can see all the big stuff happening. You can really get your finger on the pulse of what's going on. A lot of people complain about San Diego Comic-Con, but I love to go. It's huge and crazy. You know, smaller shows are good because, yeah, you can get that face-to-face, one-on-one access with some people that might have huge lines at the bigger shows. You know, I mean, Mike Mignola, you mentioned, is always so popular at the shows. There was this tiny Long Beach show over where I live in Southern California, and it was like a room this size where they just had a handful of people, and Mike Mignola was there, and there was just like 1 or 2 people at his table at a time. So you can get that experience sometimes at smaller shows. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, as far as like, I guess I spent like some years going to every show and talking to every editor, and I don't know which one's the best one, but it's just whatever show has editors that are willing to talk to you, it works. You know, something like the American Library Association show is a good show. You know, that's like there's a good contingent of comics representation there. I know Image does that show sometimes. You know, some of those Dark Horse and people like that, and those are kind of less busy shows. You can talk to people there. You know, just depends on who's there. Sometimes the smaller shows, they only have PR people available, so you can't really talk to editors. So, but I know like MegaCon is local. What's your experience with MegaCon, everybody?
There are no editors at MegaCon.
Okay.
There's and it's a big show. So you mentioned the personality. So I'll give you an example. I'm a proponent of the smaller shows. If you want to meet people, go to the smaller shows if you can, for the very reason that you stay. For instance, if you go to MegaCon and you want to see George Perez, for instance, George Perez has actually, you have to take a number to see him. His line is so long to get to see him at MegaCon. However, Barry and I did a show in Claremont, and you know, now it was a basketball gym or something like that. It was a sizable room, but you could walk up and there was maybe 1 or 2 people in line to see George Perez. So it was a whole lot easier to actually get to see someone like that at a smaller show. And it's really just because it's a smaller show. There's not as many people go. It's not as crazy. It's not as wild and hectic. And I think that's where you're going to have a greater opportunity for a conversation. For a memorable conversation. I think you can go to San Diego, or you can go to MegaCon, and you can meet these people, absolutely. But I think if you want a memorable meeting, a memorable conversation, try to find a smaller show to go to.
Yep.
Yeah, if your goal is to meet an editor or meet publishers, at a con, that's a real crapshoot. You know, they're probably not going to remember you. But if that is what you want to do, then they don't do nearly as many shows as they used to. So you're going to have to go where they go. You're going to have to go to San Diego. You're going to have to go to New York, or Seattle or Portland, because Dark Horse and a lot of similar size publishers are going to be at those shows because it's their hometown area. But
I went to so many shows. I met everybody so many times. They got to remembering me. So that's something you might want to consider. Going to a lot of shows and going up and checking in with, this particular editor, this particular publisher every time. So they'll get to remember you. Yeah. And if they say, hey, this is pretty cool, when you give them your pages, next time you see them, hey, I'm Daniel. I wrote so and so. Oh yeah, So familiarity and FaceTime is.
Be prepared to give them a gift of your comic. That's what anytime you're going to meet somebody, be prepared to say, hey, look, here's my comic, I hope you enjoy it. Right. Don't say, here's my comic, hire me to work for you. You just say, here's my comic, I hope you enjoy it. It's what it's what I've been working on.
Wait, but never give it to them. Like if they say, the editor's not here, but they'll be back real soon. Want me to take that for you?
No.
You might as well be throwing it in the trash can.
Yeah, it gets tossed in a pile.
Yeah.
Ignore the assistant. Is my takeaway.
Yeah.
It looks like we're going to open up the floor and online as well, I believe, an online moderator to your questions. So I will stop asking questions and you may ask questions. There's microphones on either side of the room. Just raise your hand and they will come to you. We have one right up front that can open us up.
Hi. Do I need to tell my degree program or anything, or how to?
Sure. Tell us a little
My
about
name's Silas Dixon. I'm in graphic design online. I actually am a comic book artist. I have a webcomic that I've started. And my question to you guys with this is, it seems like in a lot of media that the gatekeepers are gone. With Ka-Blam, with Comixology, you can do whatever you want. How then, I'm doing a webcomic, how do I monetize it? I'm paying my penciler out of my own pocket. I'm paying my letter out of my own pocket. I'm 16 weeks in, I'm out of money. My penciler is offered to finish the book for free, which is awesome, but I don't want to ink for free, so I don't want him to pencil for free. Other than Kickstarter or Patreon, what do you recommend for monetization for it, so that I can actually keep doing it and produce the product?
It's the holy grail. But
Yeah, it is. It is. That's $1 million question.
Kickstarter is really the 800
Yeah,
pound gorilla in
yeah.
that area right now.
Yeah.
So one possibility too is that and I've seen this done successful with some webcomics, is that after you get so many pages, and you'll have to determine what that is, but after you get so many pages, and I'm just going to toss out, say, 60 pages, right? You take those and you collect them into a volume, and you go to Ka-Blam and you print this and say, hey, this is my webcomic volume 1, and you can sell that at shows, you can sell that online, and because fans, which is weird, right? It's one of these things that I find very difficult to explain. You offer people stuff free online, and yet they're still going to come and buy this bound volume from you. But I think a lot of it is, the comics is still kind of the collector, and that's one of the things in talking print and digital is that when I'm as a collector, I can't get you to sign my digital copy, right? I'm not going to let you write on my tablet, right? But I'll buy a paper comic, a paper version of that, and have you autograph it for me. Right, so that's one thing you can try.
Yeah, if you're like halfway through your story or something like that, you could call it Volume 1 and print it, and then say Volume 2 is coming. You know what I mean? So then you could finish your story, even if the story's not done. Just give us an artificial ending of some sort.
shape it to a cliffhanger.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, I would recommend crowdfunding. I mean, it's not fun, but. There's really, I don't know any other way to monetize, how to get money for comics, unless you're working at a place that will pay you for it, So.
And I think that really is the kind of the $1 million question for digital stuff, is that no one's really figured out the secret key to monetizing digital yet.
And, when you do your own stuff, I mean, the thing is, like, you have Comixology Submit,
Right.
Which is, Comixology, do you have your stuff up on there?
Not yet.
Okay.
It's not done.
Okay, when it's ready, though.
Work up with indie publishers.
Okay.
Comixology, and I think actually Barry prints some of our stuff too.
Okay, cool,
Got some
yeah.
stuff out, but not my properties.
Okay, all right. When you get that stuff out, like on Comixology Submit, you're not necessarily really going to sell very much. What sells on Comixology is if you have like an image book or something like that. Then you're going to move some units. So if you can invest in some sort of publicity, but I can't even promise you that will produce sales. It can get you publicity, but not necessarily get you sales. Yeah.
Another
Hello.
question?
My name is Michael Stokely. I wanted to ask, piracy is one thing that publishers have to deal with, but with YouTube, with a lot of channels starting variant comics, comic storian, channels like that starting series where they'll review a comic all the way through and show from start to end what happens. How do you think publishers will go at this as far as trying to keep their story to the digital format and through their actual publishing?
Well, under fair use, can you not review?
You can't show the whole thing.
Can't show the whole
There's
thing,
a
though.
percentage. I don't remember what the percentage is. I'm guessing. I want to say someone in here might know. I want to say
a small
20
percent of
it's
the
like
whole.
20%.
So how long?
Yeah, I just know I've worked on a lot of shows that they have a problem with where people review something start to finish that's gonna
Yeah.
air.
There's a percentage though in which you can show, but I don't remember what that percent is.
But yeah, if it's the whole book, that's a little problematic, and maybe time for a cease and desist order.
Yeah, and some of that probably depends on how many what kind of traffic the website has. If the website, if you go there and they're reviewing the book and there's 900 hits, there's something like DC might say, well, 900, we're not going to worry about it. But if it has 90,000 hits, then that might be something DC says, okay, this guy's showing our entire book here. How is it affecting our sales? Is it affecting our sales? And do we send them a cease and desist letter?
I think, as a reader or writer or whatever, to me, that's not the ideal way to experience a comic.
No.
Right.
So that, probably, the true fan is not going to, pass up buying it for that.
That may or may not pose a danger.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's like having a cake materialize in your stomach instead of eating it.
Where's the fun in that?
Where is the fun in that?
We have another question?
Hi over there. I'm John. I'm actually the moderator for the live stream, and I have a question from Omar Walker, who is a film BFA. He says, I want to write graphic novels in the future along with pursuing film. How different is writing in that format, and how could I apply screenwriting to the process of comic writing in some way?
Could I start with, or you go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead, you.
Story is story, regardless of what you're doing. I find that whether it was my experience in comics, I've also done some writing for traditional scripted television and film. It all works. It all works largely the same way. You're creating something that has forward motion and builds momentum and has certain points and turns. It's really not that different. With comics, just like television, you know where an episode ends and something else is going to pick up. Literally anything you know about story in any format applies to almost everything all the way through. I'll drop it there if you have something different to say about it. I have very broad ideas about story being exactly the same no matter what the format.
No, I agree with that, and I could just add on to it. It's structure of a story, character. It's the same. It's just in a comic. Make sure you read comics. A lot of people that are aspiring filmmakers will say, "Oh, I'll do a comic too." But make sure you read comics and you understand how the pages are laid out. You understand what panels are, because what panels are a collection of moments. Yeah. So, like when you think about a stage play is completely all real time, and the actors working with the director and the playwright or whatever are creating the story through moments. Which are pauses, which are or whatever. But and then in film you're dealing with cuts. But in a comic book you're dealing with a sequence of panels, and each panel's a moment. So as you're constructing your story, as you're writing your dialogue, you got to construct that moment for moment. You have to know exactly what moments you want to nail in each panel in order for it to make sense. Otherwise, you're giving your artist a lot more work to do. And also, I would say, don't be too cavalier about getting into comics. If you really want to be a filmmaker and you're thinking, maybe I'll do a comic too. Comics is a commitment. It really is. So you could do both, but just don't have an attitude that comics is slightly easier, so I'll do that. I've worked alongside friends who they're making a film and I'm making a comic, and I'm not saying I'm working as hard as them, but there's some sort of relative weight.
And if you're cynically producing a comic book as your entree into I'm going to produce a comic book, which means that the film industry will come calling because I will now have a comic book that I can go out and use as a pitch tool or a sales tool. That cynicism actually there's a faint aroma that comes off of pieces that were produced just for that end.
See, I actually think writing a comic is more complex than writing a screenplay or a stage play. Writing a comic is closer to writing a slideshow than it is to writing a movie. You've got to really condense it down. You can't rely on a character walking from point A to point B. No, you've got to give me that essence of what it is they're trying to accomplish in that movement. I've made 24 frames a second in a film, and you've got maybe 100 frames in a 20-page comic.
I call it snapshot thinking, and the comics writer has to think of the single frame that gives us the most information.
Yeah, sure.
I think you have to be real careful not to try to take your screenplay and say, I'm just going to take my screenplay and then I'm just going to start drawing. Because I think you're going to end up with a big mess because of all these things that you've heard set up here. I think, and I've seen some done that way, and you get picture books, and you get page after page after page of just people moving and doing and no talking and all that kind of stuff. And I don't know that we're really interested. I stopped reading picture books when I was 5, maybe not 5, something like that.
Well, you adapted a script.
I did.
And to me,
one of my worst experiences ever.
Well, but it was a good reading. I read your comic, your graphic novel. It's called The Remaining, and it was good. It was very readable. Were there things you had to really take into account as you adapted that to make it work as a comic?
Yeah, there were. Obviously, in a screenplay, or in this one anyway, there were stretches of times when they this happened and they did this and he did that and he did this and it was hard. It's not translatable, I think is the word. It's not really translatable into a comic. And so what you really, in any kind of adaptation, what you really have to figure out is what are the important parts? What am I, in this scene right here, and in these 4 pages, in this scene, what am I trying to communicate to the reader? What is it important that they learn from when the scene opens to when the scene closes? What do they need to know before they can go on to the next scene? And I think that's the kind of thing you have to figure out in doing a comic adaptation is, okay, so this is what it is. Now, how can I make that work in the comic format?
Well, and you did some interesting things, and again, it goes to working in the format, but like coming to the end of the page and then turning to a splash page with a great reveal.
Yeah.
And that was, I guess, picking through the script and finding those.
It was just kind of looking through and saying, okay, this could make a page turner moment. And of course, now in this particular script that you're mentioning, one of the things that we try to do, because you actually mentioned earlier, comics have an unlimited special effects budget. We're actually able to add in a few things that the film only hinted at. The film kind of hinted at the monsters. We actually had them there so that you could see them. And I know that there's a great big debate as to whether that was the right thing to do or not. But one of the things we were able to do, the artist who drew the book, it was a fantastic horror artist. My thoughts were, we need to see a Cowhoat's monster here. So.
Yeah, it's just writing an adaptation. It's like when you adapt a novel to a movie. You're changing it to a completely new format. You got to make it work as a movie, and I've done that too. Going from movie script to comic, it's possible, but you have to know how to make a comic and how to pace things out correctly. And it's like what you said. It's like snapshot thinking. When I'm writing a comic scene, I think of it as these actors are on a stage, and I'm taking pictures of the most important moments, and those pictures are what end up being the panels. And you have to make sure everything's coherent and flows and makes sense.
Yeah, in reality television, we deal a lot with just condensing time, and I think that's a lot of what comics do. Is you are getting usually the most abbreviated but beautifully constructed version of a story.
Yeah, because it's not just a matter of we need this to be shorter. Although, you'll get 50 hours of tape and it has to become a 30-minute program, but condensing all that down into a 30-minute program makes it part of the art. The art expresses itself in that form of pacing, and that's how comics work too.
Yep.
All right. Thank you from Omar. I actually have another question from online. This is from Sean in the Recording Arts program, and he wants to know, with mediums such as ebooks, is there a future in integrating motion graphics and sound effects into digital versions of comics?
Oh, I hope not.
Well,
that sounds like something that would make somebody very busy.
That's actually, and there's a company that does that. Madefire. Madefire does that. Yeah. You have it on your iPad, and there's motion graphics and sound and stuff like that. So we're actually working on a virtual reality adaptation of my Moriarty title right now. So, but that's like, we wanted to give the experience of being inside a comic panel, so you could experience the comic story, but actually be inside of it. So that was the reason for doing that. Was I thought everybody, I always wanted to go into the page. So I think if you're going to do something like that, you should have a good reason for it.
I was at a panel presentation at San Diego a couple of years ago, and one of these companies that was, had just gotten big rounds of investment and was going to turn comics into these motion graphic things. And they were giving their presentation, and seated just a couple of seats over from me was a pretty well-known artist, and I heard him mumble to the person next to him, "This is a horse on a skateboard."
I would think, and I know there's been some expanded universe work done, and I would think that's where it's really possibly interesting. If you have, as you mentioned, like a room or a world, and it fits in the story on the page, but then if somebody wants to go online and experience it in a deeper way or explore it more.
It's good for marketing content. It's like sometimes, I like there was these Batman Black and White, Batman Black and White. They did some motion comics for that, and like I enjoyed seeing Paul Dini and Darwin Cook's stuff, animated. It's not something I'm going to look at all the time, but it's like, oh, this is a decent experience.
The problem with that often is it comes across looking like cheap animation, and
it has to be like very stylized.
It has to be, and because the problem is when you look at it, you're like, well, this looks like just really cheap animation. Why am I going to watch this when I can go watch really good animation? And I think that's part of the problem with a lot of the sort of the motion comic idea is that it's a kind of a nifty idea, but it doesn't really work that well, I don't think.
And I think above all, we always gravitate back to good story and to the experience that fulfills and excites us, and that's kind of the other things are kind of tack-ons to it.
The most underappreciated part of a comic is the stuff that you don't see, the things that your mind fills in between the panels. So when you take a comic and you chop it up, what you get is something that's somehow less than the sum of its parts. That's always been my feeling. I mean, you add the motion, you add the sound back into it, but you've taken out that part that your mind had to add into it. And and that's the really satisfying part when the panels come to life for you and you think you're seeing them move. You made the transition from this panel to this panel in your head. But when you chop that up, you lose that.
So I'm Tim Thiessen and the creative writing BFA. I know half of you. So once the comic is made and ready to go to print, what are some channels that you can pursue to publicize and market the comic and build some heat behind the title?
Go to conventions and show it to editors. I'd also consider whether or not you want to. You probably, if you'll want to do print copies, and you'll probably want to go to Ka-Blam or someplace like that to do it. You don't want to go to big print house and print 2,000 or 3,000 copies of one issue. Don't ever do mass.
Unless money is no issue.
Yeah, but or storage space, because you might sell 200 of them. But consider your outlets. Like I said, you can go to Comixology, submit, Amazon, and have a book available digitally worldwide. And you can at least tell people that you're probably not going to sell many, but you can at least tell people you have a distributed book. But you do need print copies. Like I say, go to Ka-Blam, a place like that, and do it.
There was, I think we've kind of shifted a little bit in the way we promote things now. It seems with the ability to put something up online or put something at Comixology or that kind of thing, it seems almost pointless now to hype something before it comes out. You start hyping and you put a hyperlink in there so that they can go buy it immediately. If you start before the book is done, building up an anticipation of it, then by the time it's actually done, you've lost some steam there. You've lost sales that you could have gotten.
Yeah, like my podcast friends are like, when's your book coming out? I'll have you on the show right after it comes out so we can push out a link. If you want to go on and just talk about it coming out next week, people are going to forget 5 minutes later.
Pre-ordering is a big thing if you're working for a major publisher. You want to do some promotion.
Yep.
But if you're going to be in the Diamond catalog,
then that's important. But the number of independent comics being produced versus the number of independent comics that are in the Diamond catalog now, there's a huge disparity. So pre-selling, pre-ordering isn't nearly as important for independent creators as it once upon a time was.
In your first time out, just think about self-publishing, and if it's good, somebody wants to pick it up, then you haven't hurt anything by putting it out on Comixology. You can just pull it and let the publisher put it out. But I always advise just self-publish the first time, get to know the ropes, because you can make mistakes when you're doing it yourself, and the stakes are low at that point. You can always pull it if you decide you don't like it.
Do you find, just for the panel in general, do you find that pushing a single one-shot graphic novel is a little bit easier to mount PR for than trying to do something that you're eventually going to do as a serialized book?
Ongoing?
Yeah, because I can remember that almost everything I've heard about on the news and in any kind of feature, when the graphic novel about Brian Epstein came out, that there was a lot of that on the news. When Representative John Lewis, they had the comic book about, the graphic novel, God forbid, as Will Eisner comes back from the grave and chokes me to death. It just seems like those have a longer life, so it's easier to promote those.
Well, my experience at comic shows is that, and I go to a lot of shows with Barry. Is my experience is I take a lot of the floppies, right, the single issues. People almost don't look at those anymore. You know, because I have the graphic novels there with me. I have the individual comics. I have the graphic novels. People almost don't look at those. They just they gravitate towards the graphic novels. And you know, even though the price point is higher on a graphic novel than a floppy, still that's 90% of what I sell at a show.
Yeah, true enough.
The complete story.
Yeah, but at the same time, if you're a young creator, I think you have to do 20 and 24-page stories, because the commitment of time and resources to do a full-size graphic novel is so enormous.
Yes.
You need to be focusing on learning how to finish things. You know?
Yep.
Gotcha.
You need to be learning how to do that 20 to 24-page story.
You think it ought to be a
and wrap it
one-shot?
up. Maybe, but you know, comics. If your goal is to sell in comic shops, the dominant model in comic shops is serialized storytelling.
Yeah.
The retailers want their audience coming back, or their customers coming back week after week to pick up their books on Wednesday. So they need serialized storytelling. So that's the model at Marvel, DC, you know, and Image and Dark Horse. That's the model, serialized storytelling. So if that's what you want to do, if you want to learn your craft, you need to focus on learning how to finish a 20, 24-page segment of a story. Once you've mastered that and you've got the time and the resources to devote to a bigger project, and that's what you want to do, go for it.
That's what I make my class do. So
Yeah.
I know the guys at Image told me, because I asked once, why don't they do more like, you know, digital issues and then just print the trades, because the financial resources to print individual issues and send them out are staggering. But they're like, well, you know, especially for, you know, writers that aren't, or writers, artist teams, whatever, that are lesser known, we got to get the issues out every month, because that's like, it's like PR for the trades. It's like PR for the person. If they see my name on the stand every month for the next 8 months, they're gonna know me. If you just put out one trade or two trades a year, you know. But then that ends up being, you know, when the onus is on the creator to front all the capital to get the book done, that makes life very difficult. But, you know, it's a difficult game anyways. Nobody ever said it was easy.
So we touched on a handful of things. Obviously, conventions are a big thing, but someone mentioned podcast, and that's something you can do. Reach out to podcasters who do comic shows, right? Reach out to YouTubers who review full issues of comic books, you know, and you know, don't be afraid to give away a bunch of copies. Obviously, you know, you're in it. You want to make the money. But when you're first out of the shoot, don't be afraid to give away copies. And I don't just mean give away. Your friends should go buy them, right, to support you. But give them away to editors. Give them away to reviewers. Don't be afraid to give a healthy chunk of them away. You know, hoping that you're going to get sort of some coverage from that.
Hi, my name is Jasmine Slade. Oops, sorry. Creative writing BFA, and I've grown up with a lot of graphic artists, and I have workshopped with a lot of them on certain things. And I think my main question is when to know when to hold and to fold with certain ideas. When to know when an idea is actually worth working with a specific artist. If you have something here that you can definitely continue on figuring out, or whether this partnership isn't really going to work and you should probably find someone who better fits this idea, or you find something that better fits the idea that this artist can work with.
It just Kaizen, it's just a gut check. I don't know how to.
Well, what kind of time frame are you working on? If they can't, you tell them, I need this done in, you know, I want this issue done in 4 months, and 2 years later, it's not done.
Not in a specific time frame, just in a long term, how to know when you can work with an artist and how to know when not. Sometimes I fall under the idea that I can work with somebody, and this idea can definitely work if we just work out kinks and figure out how to better communicate. Basically, how to know when to better communicate, or if the problem isn't communication at all. It's just that you two are looking for two different things.
It's like any kind of workplace problem, really. You know, any kind of team situation in a workplace, like in a school, like work with the faculty. You know, I mean.
I think when it is more pain than it is result, I think is the measure. Are you getting anything finished? And if not, maybe, cut the loss, cut the cord, and move on. Sorry to interrupt you.
No. I think when you're collaborating like that, I think one of the questions you have to kind of figure out before you even embark on this, and this may or may not be what your problem is that sometimes you find that you're really emotionally invested in a story, but your artist is not. And I often give this example in class, is that if you've really got this big battle mech story that you want to tell, a lot of machines and stuff like that, and that's the story that you really want to tell, but your artist wants to draw My Little Pony, I think you're going to have a hard time keeping that artist engaged. And so I think it's vital when you start a collaborative project that you find out what they want to draw, because even if it's 24 pages, or if you're embarking on a mini series of 24 times 4 is I can't do the math, 90 pages, whatever. This is a lot of commitment for. It's a bigger time commitment for an artist than it is for a writer. So you've got to be aware of that and realize what you're asking them to do. And again, this may or may not be your instance, but I think you have to find out the kinds of things that they want to draw, because otherwise they might get 12 pages, 15 pages into it and say, I'm bored, I'm moving on, I'm going to do something else. Or they just put you off, especially if you're friends, they'll just put you off. Yeah, I hadn't got to it yet. I need to get back around to it. Blah blah blah, that kind of thing.
The tough part with collaboration is when it falls apart, if you're still passionate about it, being able to move forward, and what your responsibilities are to the person that failed to meet, in your eyes, the characters there. I have a couple of unfinished, I shouldn't say unfinished, I have a couple of screenplays I wasn't happy with that I co-wrote with someone. And there's nothing you can do when it's done. If you're not happy with the final product, you just got to let it die.
Yeah. Move on.
Yeah.
It is a tough thing, but it's that's one of those decisions that really only you can make. Is like, okay, are you at the point where you're ready to tell this artist, okay, you know what, we've been dragging on, and if you're not interested in this, I would like to find someone else who is, and maybe you and I can find a project that you are interested in drawing.
So sometimes as a young writer, it's easier to get something accomplished if, rather than taking your story to an artist, you have the artist, you find out what the artist really wants to do and tailor something to them, and then split it. This is both our projects, and sometimes you'll have more luck getting that done, and save your great epic for when you've reached a station where you can have people willing to work with you just because of who you are.
Right.
Yeah, and I think I'll just kind of reiterate, think of it as any kind of work situation. And that's a problem that people have specifically in comics, is they don't think of themselves as a team doing a job. I'll get to it when I can. That kind of attitude comes from not thinking of it as a job. And collaborators I work with think of it as a job. And, I tell them when I'm going to get them the pages, when we're going to get the funding, and I get it to them when I can. And when they are ready, they will start, and they'll project a date to have it done, because it's a business. And if you don't go in thinking like that, you may have some trouble. And if you're collaborating with somebody who's not thinking of it as a business and they're just being lax, then that's a problem. Yeah.
All right. I got another online question here. This one comes from Brandy, who is in the Creative Writing BFA program, and this is for Mr. Williams and Mr. Mann. And Brandy wants to know, have you ever considered writing for one another's mediums? So, Mr. Williams, have you considered doing comics? And Mr. Mann, have you considered doing books?
Well, I'll start, Roland.
Okay.
Didn't mean to jump right ahead there. Actually, Roland and I met. We've been talking about conventions. Roland and I met at a convention, I guess maybe CoastCon, probably, back in the day. I had a couple of books published by then. And I think we probably were on a panel together somehow or other and met and started talking. And I actually did some the comics work I did back in the day started because Roland had already had some comics published. And so it speaks to networking. We got to know each other and gave me some comics opportunities that I liked comics, but I wasn't necessarily looking to break in or whatever, and it just got my foot in the door knowing Roland and him knowing some editors. So and yes, I have written comics, including The Dusk Society, a young adult horror graphic novel, and The Scary Book, a comedy horror graphic novel, plus The Mantis Files and Sirens and Marauder.
Yeah. Yeah, and as for me, I really have no interest in film or television or anything like that. I just have no. I like to watch films and not so much television, but I really have no interest in writing, primarily because I don't understand it. And I think I've been doing comics too much that I actually like to direct, and I know that's a big deal in film is like don't direct. And so I have no interest in that. I do write prose, though. I do have one novel that's out, and I've actually completed 2 others that are still looking for a home. So the answer is yes.
This is going to be the last question.
Hi, my name is Rena. I'm actually a film student transitioning to creative writing. And being a gamer and a female gamer, I'm the stereotypical demographic of I'm big on story. And I see a lot of times video games become either manga or comics. And do you ever see that becoming more apparent with more of the video games that come out where they become graphic novels, or do you not really see that happening a lot?
It happens. Yeah, I mean, it's marketing, transmedia marketing content. It's just like they'll make, like Assassin's Creed is comic. A guy I know, Connor, works on that. And then they made the movie. So I'm not going to say it's bad. It can be good. If you can write a good comic book based on a video game or make a great movie out of it, more power to you. Is it done all the time? I mean, we could probably sit here and think about instances where it's happening recently. It just depends on how much money they have. I mean, these are big media companies that are making these games, so they've maybe got some money to sling around. Yeah,
as someone who's done my fair share of adaptations, I can't say that they're a terrible thing.
Yeah.
because actually, and I know I tell my class this, adaptations are actually, I think, a good avenue for rookie writers to get into the industry, because sometimes they don't always want somebody with a well-established name because they don't want to pay the rates of the well-established names for their properties, and so they'll often reach out to young writers to say, hey, look, we need this game adapted. I know that one of my very first works was an adaptation of a PC game, and it was, to this date, it's still one of the coolest assignments I ever had, because they sent me the game and said, okay, play the game and then write a pitch for it, right? An outline for it. So I spent a whole week playing a video game. That was my work. It's pretty cool. So I'm not sure exactly what the question was. Was it just that it was bad, or?
Do we see more of it happening?
See that more of that happening, either print or digitally, or just overall?
I think it's always happened. So I think that we've always had. I mean, go back to Star Wars. I mean, we had Star Wars adaptations in comic books. So I think it's always been there. I think that maybe we just have more games that are big games that we're aware of that's happening too. So I don't know that we're seeing an increase or a decrease either one.
I think it is just always going to go to demand the degree of success of the property, and then is there hunger for more material?
Right.
Certainly with Star Wars, the hunger for the expanded universe was there,
and I think you can always question, was this a good idea or was this a bad idea? Sometimes it's a good idea, sometimes it's a bad idea. I mean, I don't know, but I don't know that we're really seeing. I mean, what do you guys think? More or less?
Games have storylines, but there's a difference between a storyline and a story. You know, a storyline is a component of a story, but it's not the same thing. I got hired back in the 90s to adapt a pretty well-known video game into a comic, and never was I more relieved when the publisher pulled the plug on it, because taking a storyline and turning it into a story involves making changes to the structure and to things that happen to the characters, and those things don't always jibe with what the game is about, and so it's hard. It was hard for me to find anything satisfying about working on it, or find a satisfying story based on.
As a writer, the coolest project you can get for something like that is to say, here's our world. Right? Here's our video game world. We want you to take and we want you to create a story, maybe using these characters and set in this world, but that is not a straight adaptation. I would much rather do that. I would much rather you say, here's this world, right? Here's this game. Go play this game and then write me a story that's either about one of these characters or set in this world, but is not the game. I would much rather do that because it gives me, as a writer, it gives me kind of some creative freedom to, of course you're going to, everything has to be under their rules and their constraints and that kind of thing. But I would much rather do that because when you're doing an adaptation, you're really trying to figure out someone else's ideas and to make them work.
Well, what you were describing there is really not that much different than being given a story Bible and being told to come up with a story. That could be very satisfying.
Yes.
Yeah, and part of the mission or part of the purpose of transmedia is supposed to be increasing the shelf life of a property and increasing the revenue streams, engaging different people and demographics in different ways. So, and I like what Roland was just saying. If you could do something, you have the video game with this particular character and this particular things that are happening. But if you're given the freedom to build something kind of maybe different in that world, in the comic, then that really captures the essence of what transmedia is and makes it exciting. And that could be a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. That could be a lot of fun to do, and it could be satisfying for a reader. So yeah, the expanded Star Wars universe that Marvel's publishing all these comics now. That stuff's not in the movies. There's a Poe Dameron comic Charles Soule is writing. We're seeing a lot more Poe than we did in just episode 7. It's expanding that universe. It's giving people new things to look at, new things to experience using that character in the Star Wars universe. Mm-hmm. So it could be a good thing.
It's almost like niching fandom also because people that like Poe get more story.
Yeah.
Excellent. So that was our last question for the panel. And I would like to thank all of you who attended live and all of you watching online for tuning in. And please, let's thank Daniel, Troy, Barry, Roland, and Sid for their valuable knowledge and expertise this afternoon.
And Tom.